So there's two big numbers that have kind of come out of the news, especially as we enter November 2020, early December 2020. And the first of those numbers is 260,000. 260,000, that's the number that at time of recording, Americans have died from COVID-19. It is heinous and preventable. And of course, we're going to get into all of those things in a moment. But I mentioned that there are two big numbers that are helping to describe and detail the current situation we're in right now, especially in the United States. And that other number is 30,046. 30,046 is the number that the Dow Jones Industrial Index reached just before the November holiday weekend. It's a record number, 30,000. It is a surprising number considering the sharp drop we had in all of our economic or stock market measurements, and economic measurements as well. But especially the stock market, that sharp drop that we had in March was some of the worst that we've seen, not since the Great Recession, but also since the Great Depression, as far as those economic metrics have come out. So to see this quick of a recovery on the surface looks really impressive. On the surface, of course. But then, of course, the numbers don't tell you anything, even though the stock market is doing very well. As lockdowns are going into place again, a lot of workers face the reality that they are going to be out of work for the next 3 weeks and they may not have jobs to come back to, as their employers may not be able to make it the next 3+ weeks of lockdown through the winter. We are also experiencing a troubling rise in homelessness, rise in food insecurity that's happening all across the country in a number of different populations, in cities, in rural areas, in demographically white communities, in black communities, in less so in rich communities, but definitely in working class communities, as these things tend to happen. But somehow the stock numbers are going up and things are going generally well, at least at this snapshot in time. And so the reason why there's all of this suffering happening going on Main Street while Wall Street is doing very well highlights something that I think we've known for a long time, and that's that the indicators on Wall Street are not at all connected to the real life experiences of those of us on Main Street, those of us in the rest of the world, the vast majority of people, who see day to day and see the rise in homelessness. They see that people are losing jobs, people are having a tougher time making ends meet, people are having a tougher time dealing with rent, and that's becoming a major issue. Um, so when we take a step back and wonder how exactly things got to this point, it really goes down to the fact that America had a bad diagnosis of how to fix and handle the economy back in March. See, the lockdowns did not have to have this massive amount of economic volatility at the start of the pandemic, and the suffering that the stock market ended up going through did not need to happen, of course. That stock market suffering came back after a while, but mainly what I'm trying to get at is the suffering that regular people went through is unnecessary, and just how the stock market came back, Main Street could have come back as well if America did a couple of things a little more intelligently. And here's how I'm going to argue that. Um, Never mind the craziest anti-vaxxers who see the government as tyranny, or like the anti-maskers who see any sort of like move to wear masks and do anything like that, even though that's preventable, and it's certainly preventable. The key reason these lockdowns have received pushback is because it swiftly tossed people out of work and their jobs didn't allow them to work from home. Because of this necessity where people had to separate themselves a little bit more from the outside world, because of this necessity, because this virus was spreading, there was no alternative given to regular people who are in that situation where you're taking their income away from them, you're taking probably their health insurance access away from them, and there was no answer given. And this was definitely a failure of policy, and a failure of just understanding of economics. Material conditions matter. And again, I'm going to go into some details about what happened kind of across the world. So I think we'll start with an article in the New York Times that summarizes how the title of it is How European Workers Drew Paychecks and American Workers Scrounged for Food. This was written to kind of cover things on July 3rd, but it's pretty accurate to how it ended up happening. European countries, among them Denmark, Ireland, Britain, France, the Netherlands, Spain, and Austria, have prevented joblessness by effectively nationalizing payrolls, heavily subsidizing wages, and enabling paychecks to continue uninterrupted. Again, quoting from the New York Times. So they prevented record amounts of joblessness by nationalizing payrolls, subsidizing wages, and enabling paychecks to continue uninterrupted. What happened in America, on the other hand, is that we sent all of our economic relief in the form of government-backed loans that were given to the private banks in order to distribute. By making the private banks into this middleman, this middle lender, it allowed for mismanaged paperwork, lost documents, other shady sort of behaviors that I think will become more apparent in the coming months and years as the dust settles from this pandemic and the economic response to it. What you got was a lot of waste. These so-called paycheck protection loans and the paycheck protection program didn't protect all the people that it sought out to try to help. A lot of businesses had to shut down their doors permanently because they sought out these loans, they needed these loans, they required them, they fell under the requirements for them, and they required them, of course. But our government was not there to help those regular people, those small business owners, in their hour of need. It was there to help the tourism industry, the oil and gas industry, all of the major industries that are politically connected and have the power to get their foot in the door and say, hey, yo, we need a bailout. Carnival Cruises, we're getting a bailout. The airlines, we're getting a bailout. The local restaurants that make your local community feel like what it is and makes it feel home, those are gone. Or do some paperwork with some banks here, and unless you're one of the bank's high-value clients, you're not going to get priority for this limited amount of money. And it gets even less theoretical than that, because we're talking about business owners trying to seek out money, much the same way that regular people found bureaucratic problems trying to file for unemployment, which definitely happened earlier this year for a lot of people. That was largely a result of the United States having not an ample amount of resources to supplement the wages that were being lost. And it's not that we didn't have the ample amount of resources. Let me make that clear. We have the resources. But both the Republican Party and the Democratic Party united to give Americans less than the bare minimum. We got 1,200 checks and Steve Mnuchin said it was supposed to last 10 weeks. Nancy Pelosi said, well, we'll try these things, but we don't want to give Trump an advantage by allowing him to give out money right before an election. So I guess you'll lose your job. Back to the New York Times article that's kind of giving a context to what is happening in the rest of the world. Jobless data reveals how the pandemic has assailed American workers with exceptional force. The unemployment rate in the United States has soared nearly 8 percentage points since February. It registered 11.1% in June, while France, Germany, Ireland, and the Netherlands have all limited increases in the jobless rate to less than 1 percentage point. Now, the unemployment rate is now 7%. Before this all started, it was 3.5%. We have to remember that the unemployment rate only counts those who have been actively looking for work in the past 6 months. Those who are on unemployment insurance and haven't actually been looking for work, or those who have dropped out of the job market entirely because of the fact that the hiring market in the United States is just inefficient, those people are left out of the count. So that 7% number is a gross undercount. But even given all of that, all these other countries in Europe only saw a 1% increase in their unemployment rate. That was their sharp increase. While our sharp increase was 8 percentage points. They went up by 1%, we went up by 8%. Because what they did in Europe, to summarize it up, in Europe they had programs where the government would pay a percentage of your paycheck and your employer would pay a smaller percentage of your paycheck. So therefore, the employer could save a little bit of money because they weren't making as much money as they usually would, whereas the employee didn't have to worry about losing their job or losing the majority of their income. They could continue paying their bills and not worry about that aspect of life. So they could consider the pandemic and make sure to take care of themselves, make sure to prevent the amount of times they have to go outside and interact with other people to prevent the spread of the virus. They're actually able to focus on the public health aspects of their country because the economy was taken care of. It was handled. It was under control rather than being let in free fall in the United States. So let's go back and look at this. COVID-19 has killed over 260,000 people in the United States. 260,000 Americans. It's hard to really let that sink in. But it's also killed the multi-decade Republican economic dogma. Since the Reagan era, all these attempts at big government spending have been met with resistance from the Republican Party in saying that, oh, we can't spend all of this money. Inflation will go up. It'll be too much. But we saw this year what happened when we instead decided to print trillions of dollars at the Fed and give it to big business and pump it into the stock market. So big business continues to thrive and do well. Amazon's doing record numbers, Target's doing record numbers. All these big businesses are doing great. While Main Street, all these small mom and pop stores are disappearing in front of our eyes. That's why the stock market is going up, because it's inflated with government cash. And that's why Main Street is struggling and there's homelessness everywhere, because that's where all the cash went. For Americans, the risks are heightened. I'm reading from the New York Times article again. The risks are heightened by the fact that the nation lacks a national medical system, a feature taken as a given in Europe, leaving most people reliant on their jobs for access to healthcare. And that's the thing. When you have a universal healthcare system, you can actually, again, it's another consideration, just like economics, that you don't have to worry about during a pandemic. We don't have to worry about, oh, people aren't covered for their insurance, so if they have to be put on a ventilator, they're going to be charged $30,000 on their way out. That's something we don't have to worry about. We're not continually dinging people on the way down, unlike the American meat grinder of capitalism does to people. US debt has gone up $7 trillion under the Trump administration. We went into debt over tax cuts for the rich and a trade war, and continued liquidity given to the top 1%. It's kind of insane. The GOP might do its best to lean into the Trump chaos of the transition process and all those different things to direct its attention away from the catastrophic failure to keep its country safe. But we can't forget this, that this was preventable, and better economic policy, smarter economic policy, perhaps maybe looking at our European allies or just thinking what would work best for our country here. Hopefully this will be a lesson that we can actually handle these things in a smarter way. But unfortunately, that 260,000 number and that 30,000 number are probably going to still keep going up. I don't think there's anything that more properly summarizes the state of the American economy and the American society than the fact that the number of deaths can go up and the stock market can continue to perform well. That people are losing jobs, the unemployment rate is going up, that people are getting evicted, people are out on the streets, and people are also getting, a smaller number of people are also getting richer and richer and richer, while the rest of society suffers. This is not what anyone intended when they wanted to create a fair and just society, and any attempt to continue to justify this is basically just justifying Jeff Bezos's unlimited wealth.